Today in the EU, why Macron's bid to stay relevant is falling short.
À partir d'aujourd'hui, c'est une époque nouvelle qui doit commencer, où tous devront agir pour la France et où il faudra bâtir des compromis nouveaux. Nous ne pouvons nous permettre ni les divisions, ni l'immobilisme.
Since this June, Emmanuel Macron has taken a series of political choices. The appointment of François Bayrou, his longtime ally, might be the last of them. Bayrou used his political leverage to secure the role of prime minister even after Macron had clarified that it would not happen. Now, the new French PM appears ready to move past party lines to guarantee the government's survival. So what card is Bayrou prepared to play to secure his position? Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Giada Santana, and this is Today in the EU. To understand better Macron's efforts to stay relevant and the chances of survival of a French government still in the making, I'm talking to Euractiv's politics reporter in Paris, Théo Bourgery-Gonse.
Hi, Giada.
So after swaying to the right with Barnier, Macron is now back to one of his early supporters, François Bayrou, even if he wasn't really his first choice. So can you walk us through how Bayrou ended up prime minister?
Yeah, so one thing you need to know before I get to your question specifically is that Bayrou is a close ally to Macron. He's been that since 2017, since Macron first entered office. And every time there was a reshuffling or every time a new prime minister had to be nominated under Macron's tenure, Bayrou's name would come up time and time again.
Mm-hmm.
And time again, Bayrou's name would not make it to the final round. And so this time around, it seems like Bayrou basically forced his luck and strong-armed Macron into nominating him as France's new prime minister.
And how did he do that?
Yes, the way things happened, according to a number of media reports, is that actually Bayrou was not Macron's first choice. Macron wanted to appoint one of his other close confidants, Sébastien Lecornu, who's been actually Macron's longest-serving defense minister since 2017.
Mm-hmm.
But Bayrou came in and said, if you don't nominate me, I will break ties with your troops in the parliament. And the way things work is that there is a centrist bloc, a centrist coalition in the French National Assembly, which brings Macron's troops along with Bayrou's troops. And that's about 30 MPs that are part of the Modem party. That's Bayrou's long-lasting party.
Right.
Both are centrists. But this time around, he threatened to just leave the coalition altogether, which would have put Macron into a more complicated political spot than is already the case. And so he was almost forced to let Bayrou take over as France's new prime minister. And that happened on Friday, 13th of December.
Yeah, indeed, a proper political threat that pushed Macron to cave, right?
Yeah, in many ways, we could say that Macron had to cave in because losing the explicit support of Bayrou in the political crisis that the country is experiencing was just too much to bear for a president who's already becoming a little more isolated.
Mm-hmm. And so looking at Bayrou's positioning, he is from a different party than President Macron, but can we expect more of the same policy-wise and ideologies-wise, or is Macron attempting to signal a change in policy?
In the facts, we are not aware of clear policy priorities that Bayrou wants to implement. But in reality, it's fair to think that not much will be changing. I mean, both Emmanuel Macron and François Bayrou, they've been close allies since 2017. They've seen eye to eye on a great number of files. They're both centrist, they're both liberal, they both share this political conviction of blowing up this traditional left-wing, right-wing divide and sort of bring everyone under a wider centrist umbrella. So they're seeing and interpreting the world in very much the same way. So I don't expect a clear change, of course.
Mm-hmm.
That said, because the parliamentary arithmetic is so different today than it was just a few months ago, let alone in 2017, I would imagine that Bayrou might be a little inclined to carefully listen to opposition parties' key policy demands and make room for them to a certain extent. One example I have in mind is that he said he would be willing to look into the implementation of a new proportional voting system for the National Assembly, and that's been a long-lasting ask of the far-right Rassemblement National.
Interesting.
It was something that Bayrou actually has been pushing for years as well, and there you can see that maybe there's a willingness by Bayrou to give in to some of the demands to secure maybe not their full-fledged support, but at least their sympathy. And I would expect him to do kind of the same with the left-wing coalition.
Yeah, I mean, this plan to survive a motion of no confidence seems quite ambitious, and I'd say it's rather tricky for Bayrou to promise an olive branch both to Rassemblement National, the far-right party, and to La France Insoumise, the far left.
It completely is an almost impossible task, really. And I think though Bayrou has vowed to do politics differently and to try first and foremost, I quote, to reconcile different political forces, the risks that he experiences the same fate as his predecessor, Michel Barnier, are very, very high. There is no talks of any coalition agreement. That's very much out of the table.
Right.
What we're starting to hear is this idea of a non-censorship agreement, which in practice would mean that opposition parties would renege on their constitutional right to file a vote of no confidence under the condition that the government would renege on its constitutional right to pass through a bill without a vote. And that's this infamous Article 49.3 that's been used time and time again. In fact, that's the very article that Michel Barnier has used before he was toppled and his government was ousted. So there's this idea that if there's no ex nihilo vote of no confidence by oppositions and there's no 49.3 being triggered, then that's leading to more consensus. Whether that works in practice is a different story. And so far, what I'm hearing and what political oppositions are saying is that the assurances aren't there for this non-censorship agreement to really see light of day.
This is the first time that I hear of a similar agreement. Has this ever been done before?
No, it never has. And I think it fits into Bayrou's effort to do things a little differently. But ultimately, what opposition parties have been saying so far is we need to see the policy priorities. We need to judge by the acts and not by the words. There seems to be a lack of clarity over where Bayrou wants to go in terms of policy orientations. That means that opposition parties, for the moment, are a little hesitant to agree to any kind of non-censorship agreement and give up, at least symbolically, on their constitutional tools. And I think the next few days will be critical in understanding the extent to which that can actually see the light of day.
And supposing he does gather enough political consensus in the parliament, how are citizens in France adjusting to this new prime minister?
I would stay clear of speaking on behalf of the entire French people. I think opinions can be so volatile, and especially at a moment like this one. I think Bayrou, he's been around the political landscape for some 40 years. He's a 3-time presidential hopeful. He was education minister in the 1990s. And in many ways, he's become a bit of a household name. But he also carries with him a reputation of being slightly old guard, old-fashioned, and even depicted as a little simple and dull, which doesn't quite do justice to his political and, in fact, academic credentials. He's a French literature scholar. He's a renowned Henry IV historian.
Yeah, just recently, he tried a comparison with Henry IV.
C'est aujourd'hui l'anniversaire de la naissance d'Henri IV. Il a fondé sa rencontre avec la France sur la nécessité de sortir des guerres stupides ou des guerres secondaires pour se retrouver sur l'essentiel qui est l'avenir du pays. Si je peux, à mon tour, j'essaierai de servir cette réconciliation nécessaire.
Saying that in a similar manner to the king, he would have attempted to reunite the French people with the political class now that he serves as prime minister.
And politically, whilst he's never actually made it to the highest office, he more than once was able to position himself as a kingmaker in political developments after elections. And so that made him someone that a lot of people were inclined to follow and better understand. But at the same time, he's seen as a little old-fashioned. And I think it kind of clashes with Macron's promise back in 2017 that he would reinvent the way we're doing politics. And now we're seeing the old guard come back. And that kind of goes against what Macron's been promising for so many years, it seems like.
And since the dissolution of the National Assembly, Macron has repeatedly failed to regain wide political consensus. What's your assessment of the president's efforts to stay relevant?
The way Macron has approached decision-making ever since he first got into office was in a very vertical way. Some people called it hyper-presidential decision-making approach, where everything eventually got to him and he made the final calls. And that, I think, works in a context of an absolute majority in parliament, where whatever the president says, that gets translated straight away into legislative proposals. And you're more or less certain that the majority of the National Assembly will be supporting your ideas. Things are completely different now with a parliament that is so fragmented with no clear majority and where the influence of the centrist bloc has dwindled considerably after the snap elections and where this vertical approach to decision-making no longer works because there is a genuine counterpower. And I think what's happening as a result of that is that we're seeing Macron trying to nominate close allies like Bayrou to lead the country when he's been facing such pushbacks at the European elections, at the snap legislative elections, and also the government that he's implemented in September with Michel Barnier, that very government and the policy orientations that came with the government, they were voted down. And there seems like there's no willingness to change when all the elements are there to force a change. And so what's happening as a result is that I feel like Macron is becoming more and more isolated in light of a political landscape that he has less and less control over.
And because of his isolation at home, France's role abroad has also been impacted. How is this translated on the global stage?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's partly due to the political crisis that the country is going through. It's also partly due to the budgetary and financial crisis that the country is also going through, which make France's voice not as significant as it used to be on the global stage, perhaps, but most importantly on the European stage. And centrist forces of the European Parliament are nowhere near as strong as they were in the previous legislature. The influence of France in the Commission has reduced, and the French Commissioner, Stéphane Séjourné, doesn't have the same gravitas as the previous French Commissioner, Thierry Breton. And within the European Council, I mean, Macron still has a seat at the table like every other European leader, but the voice doesn't carry just as much. Your 26 European counterparts know that there is a significant crisis at home. And we've seen it actually the past couple of weeks with the Mercosur deal, the EU-Mercosur trade deal, which France is actively against and has been actively against for months. But Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission president, managed to sort of bypass French concerns and agree to deal, or at least the first stage of the deal, ignoring the voice of a significant country like that of France. So there is genuinely and evidently a loss of influence at the European level, which is partly to be explained by the political situation in the country today.
Thank you, Théo.
Thank you, Giada.
This was Euractiv's podcast, Today in the EU. Sound design by Miriam Sáenz de Tejada and Niels de Keokelare. Research and production by Charles Cohen. Visit Euractiv to stay on top of the latest news and sign up for our newsletters. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and your favorite streaming platforms. Don't forget to subscribe and give us a review. It will really help us spread the word about our work. See you tomorrow. As part of our commitment to accuracy, inclusion, and transparency, Euractiv is part of the Trust Project.